Hello, dear listeners. This is Amelia. Today, I'm going to tell you an incredible romantic story about a woman's society buried alive, and a man everyone believed was cursed. Lady Isabella Grayson spent 3 years in exile, accused of poisoning her husband, imprisoned by her mother-in-law in grey dresses and oblivion. Alexander Thorne, Marquess of Ravencroft, lost 3 fiancées under mysterious circumstances, and was cursed never to find love. When he appeared in her garden and commanded her to dine with him, neither of them knew that their tragedies were connected by the same poison, and by one ruthless killer who would stop at nothing to destroy them both. This is not a story about rescue. This is a story about 2 equals who choose each other, fight for justice together, and prove that love is stronger than poison, scandal, and curse. But before we begin, write to me right now. Where are you listening from, and how much time do you have? I read every comment, and I love learning about you. And now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Garden and the Command. The gardens of Thornfield Manor had not seen proper care in 3 years, yet still they possessed a melancholy beauty that matched their solitary inhabitant. Lady Isabella Grayson knelt among the overgrown roses, her grey silk gown blending with the morning mist that clung to the hedgerows. At 27, she should have been gracing London ballrooms in jewel-toned silks. Instead, she wore the perpetual half-mourning that had become her prison. Her hands, once soft and pampered, now bore the calluses of a woman who tended her own garden, for Lady Victoria Grayson, her mother-in-law and jailer, permitted her few servants and fewer liberties. 3 years had passed since Edmund's death, 3 years since the accusations, 3 years since Isabella had been locked away in this country estate like a madwoman in a Gothic tale. She was cutting away dead blooms when she heard the horses. Isabella rose slowly, brushing soil from her skirts with movements that had become habitual, automatic. Visitors were rare at Thornfield Manor. Lady Victoria, who resided in the main house while Isabella occupied the smaller dower house at the edge of the property, discouraged callers. The rumours, after all, were quite dreadful. What respectable person would wish to take tea with a woman suspected of poisoning her husband? Through the hedge, she glimpsed a magnificent black stallion and a rider who sat his mount with unmistakable military bearing. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in impeccable riding attire of dark blue superfine. As he dismounted and handed his reins to a groom, Isabella caught sight of his face. Alexander Thorne, Marquess of Ravencroft. Even in her isolation, Isabella knew of him. The Cursed Marquess, they called him. 3 fiancées, all dead before their wedding days. Society whispered that he was either cursed by God or a murderer who dispatched his intended brides when he tired of them. He had not appeared in London for 2 seasons, living as a recluse in his northern estates. What business could such a man have at Thornfield Manor? Isabella should have retreated to the dower house, should have made herself invisible as she had learned to do these past 3 years. But something, perhaps the very isolation that had stripped away her fear of society's judgment, kept her rooted to the spot. The Marquess turned, as if sensing her presence, and their eyes met across the garden. His were grey as storm clouds, set in a face that might have been carved from marble for all the warmth it displayed. A thin scar ran along his left cheekbone, a souvenir from the Peninsular Wars, no doubt. He was handsome in a harsh, uncompromising way that spoke of battles fought and hardships endured. Isabella lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with the pride that remained her last possession. She would not cower. She had done nothing wrong, and if society, if this cursed Marquess, wished to think otherwise, let them. "You there," he called, his voice carrying across the garden with the authority of a man accustomed to command. Come here. Isabella's eyes narrowed. The imperious tone reminded her unpleasantly of her late husband. I am not a servant to be summoned, my lord. One dark eyebrow rose a fraction, the only indication of surprise on that stern countenance. He strode toward her, moving with predatory grace through the overgrown garden paths. As he drew nearer, Isabella realized he was even taller than she had thought, towering over her own respectable height by nearly a head. You are Lady Isabella Grayson, he stated, not a question but a declaration. I am. She raised her chin higher, daring him to speak the accusations, to voice the suspicions that had poisoned the last 3 years of her existence. But the Marquess merely studied her with those penetrating grey eyes, his expression unreadable. You tend your own garden. Lady Victoria allows me few servants. The words emerged more bitter than she had intended. And you wear grey. Half-mourning is considered appropriate for widows, my lord, though I suspect you know that society believes I should wear the scarlet of a murderess instead. A ghost of something, amusement, respect, flickered across his features. You speak plainly, madam. I have little left to lose, Lord Ravencroft. Plain speaking is a luxury afforded to the already ruined. Indeed. He continued to regard her with that unsettling intensity. You do not fear me. Isabella almost laughed. Should I? They say you are cursed, that death follows you. But I have been living in death's shadow for 3 years, my lord. Your curse holds no terror for a woman already condemned by rumour and spite. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the morning birdsong and the distant sound of Lady Victoria's voice berating a servant. Then, unexpectedly, the Marquess smiled. It was a small, grim smile, but it transformed his face, revealing the man he might have been before tragedy marked him. You will dine with me tonight, he commanded. I beg your pardon. I have business with Lady Victoria regarding the Thornfield estate, but I find I have no appetite for her company alone. You will join us for dinner at 8 o'clock. He paused, then added with deliberate emphasis, That is not a request, Lady Isabella. Isabella's temper flared. And if I refuse? Then I shall come to your dower house and carry you to the dining room myself. I spent 6 years commanding men in the peninsula, madam. I am accustomed to having my orders obeyed. I am not one of your soldiers, my lord. No, he agreed, his gaze travelling over her grey dress, her dirt-stained hands, her defiant expression. You are something far more interesting. 8 o'clock, Lady Isabella. Do not make me come fetch you. With that, he turned on his heel and strode toward the main house, leaving Isabella staring after him in a mixture of indignation and, she was startled to discover, anticipation. For 3 years, she had spoken to no one save servants and her vindictive mother-in-law. For 3 years, she had been invisible, a ghost in grey, haunting the edges of an estate that should have been hers. And now, this cursed Marquess, this man whom society feared and shunned as much as they did her, had commanded her presence as though she were a person of consequence, as though she mattered. Isabella looked down at her soiled dress and calloused hands. If she were to dine with the Marquess of Ravencroft, and she found, rather to her surprise, that she wished to, she would need to make herself presentable. She had one dinner gown that was not grey, a deep blue silk that she had hidden from Lady Victoria's purging of her wardrobe. She had not worn colour in 3 years. Perhaps it was time to remember that she was still alive. Even if society believed her a murderess, even if the man who commanded her presence was himself suspected of the same crime. Isabella gathered her shears and basket and turned toward the dower house, her heart beating faster than it had in 3 long grey years. Chapter 2. Revelations and Machinations. Isabella stood before her looking-glass, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. The blue silk gown clung to a figure grown too thin from sparse meals and anxiety. Her auburn hair, dressed simply by her own hands, gleamed in the candlelight, but it was her eyes that arrested her. They blazed with something she had thought lost forever. Defiance, life, hope. Foolish, she whispered to her reflection. Yet she could not deny the quickening of her pulse at the thought of dinner with the Marquess. Not because of any romantic fancy. She had been married, had learned that marriage was often a battlefield where love went to die, but because for the first time in 3 years, someone had looked at her and seen not a suspected murderess, but a woman, a person. The walk from the dower house to the main house was brief, yet Isabella felt as though she were crossing an ocean. The September evening had turned cool, and she wrapped her only shawl, grey, of course, about her shoulders. Jameson, the elderly butler who had served the Grayson family for 40 years, opened the door. His weathered face softened when he saw her. "Lady Isabella?" he murmured, his voice low. "It does my heart good to see you, my lady, and in such a fine gown." "Thank you, Jameson." Isabella touched his arm gently. The butler was one of the few servants who still treated her with kindness, though she knew it cost him Lady Victoria's displeasure. "How fares the household?" "As well as can be expected, my lady." His expression grew troubled. "Lady Victoria is displeased by his lordship's invitation to you." "I imagine she is." Isabella straightened her spine. "Where am I to go?" "The blue drawing-room, my lady. His lordship awaits you there." The blue drawing-room had been her favourite when Edmund lived. She had redecorated it herself during the first year of her marriage, choosing azure silk wallpaper and cream furnishings. It hurt to enter it now, to see how Lady Victoria had altered it, replacing Isabella's choices with heavy crimson draperies and dark wood furniture that made the room oppressive. The Marquess of Ravencroft stood before the fireplace, one arm resting on the mantel, his posture relaxed yet somehow alert. He had changed from his riding clothes into evening attire of black superfine with a pristine white cravat. The candlelight cast shadows across his austere features, emphasizing the scar on his cheekbone. He turned as she entered, and something flickered in those storm-grey eyes. "Lady Isabella?" He bowed, the gesture perfectly correct, yet somehow warmer than mere courtesy required. "I see you have decided not to force me to make good on my threat. I confess myself curious as to whether you would truly have carried me here over your shoulder, like a sack of grain, my lord." The corner of his mouth lifted. "I spent the summer of 1811 carrying wounded men off the battlefield at Albuera. I assure you, I am more than capable." Before Isabella could respond, the door swept open, and Lady Victoria entered in a rustle of black bombazine and barely suppressed fury. Isabella's mother-in-law was a handsome woman of 50, with iron-grey hair and sharp features that might have been attractive if not perpetually set in lines of disapproval. She wore her widow's weeds like armour, though her husband, Isabella's father-in-law, had been dead these 10 years. "Lord Ravencroft," Lady Victoria said, her voice honey-sweet despite the daggers in her eyes. "I was not aware you had invited her to dine with us." "Indeed?" The Marquess's tone could have frozen the Thames. "How strange, as I informed you of my intention when I arrived this afternoon. Perhaps your hearing is failing, Lady Victoria. A tragedy at your relatively young age." Lady Victoria's mouth tightened, but she managed a brittle smile. "Of course, my lord. How thoughtful of you to show such Christian charity to my poor daughter-in-law. Though I fear her presence may cast a pall over our meal. There are such unpleasant rumours, you understand." "Oh, I understand rumours quite well. the Marquess said softly, dangerously. I am intimately acquainted with their nature, having been the subject of rather dreadful ones myself. Which is precisely why I find Lady Isabella's company refreshing. We have much in common, you see. Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks, though whether from embarrassment or gratitude she could not say. Lady Victoria's smile grew strained. Shall we proceed to the dining room? Dinner was an exquisite form of torture. The meal itself was excellent. Cook had outdone herself with roasted pheasant, buttered asparagus, and delicate pastries. But the conversation was a battlefield where Lady Victoria lobbed subtle insults, disguised as concern, and the Marquess parried with cold courtesy. Isabella said little, content to observe this clash of wills. She had not realised that the Marquess possessed such skill at verbal warfare. Every time Lady Victoria attempted to diminish Isabella with a veiled reference to the tragedy or poor Edmund's untimely death, the Marquess redirected the conversation with surgical precision. Tell me, Lord Ravencroft, Lady Victoria said as the final course was cleared, what brings you to Thornfield Manor? Surely not merely to visit our humble estate? Business, Lady Victoria. The Thornfield property borders my own lands to the north. I am interested in purchasing the eastern meadows. Lady Victoria's eyes sharpened with avarice. That could perhaps be arranged, my lord, for the right price, of course. Of course. The Marquess set down his wineglass with deliberate care. Though I confess myself uncertain as to whom I should negotiate with. The property, I believe, passed to Lady Isabella upon her husband's death. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. There were irregularities with the will, Lady Victoria said stiffly. As Edmund's mother, I have taken control of the estate until matters are properly settled. How convenient for you. The Marquess's tone was mild, but his eyes were steel. And how long has this temporary arrangement persisted? 3 years, Isabella heard herself say. Both the Marquess and Lady Victoria turned to look at her. She met their gazes steadily. 3 years since Edmund's death. 3 years since Lady Victoria took control of the property that my husband left to me. 3 years since she confined me to the dower house and spread rumours that I poisoned her son. Lady Victoria's face flushed crimson. How dare you? Truth? Isabella rose from her chair, 3 years of suppressed fury finally breaking free. I dare speak the truth, because I have nothing left to lose. You accused me of murder, madam, with no proof beyond your own malice. You imprisoned me here, stole my inheritance, destroyed my reputation, and expected me to accept it all in silence. You killed my son. I loved your son, Isabella's voice broke. Edmund was difficult, controlling, often cruel, but I did not kill him. When he fell ill, I nursed him myself. I held his hand as he died, and then you accused me of murder before his body was cold. Silence fell, broken only by Isabella's ragged breathing. The Marquess rose slowly, his expression unreadable. Lady Victoria, I believe this conversation has become too agitated for the dinner table. Perhaps we should retire to the drawing-room. But Isabella had had enough. If you will excuse me, my lord, I believe I shall return to the dower house. Thank you for the meal and for... She swallowed hard. For seeing me. For 3 years I have been invisible. Thank you for that, at least. She turned to leave, but the Marquess's voice stopped her. Lady Isabella, wait. She paused, not turning. I would speak with you privately before you go. There is a matter I wish to discuss. Lady Victoria gasped. Surely, my lord, you cannot mean to... What I mean to do, Lady Victoria, is no concern of yours. The ice in his voice would have made lesser beings flee. You will excuse us. It was not a request. Lady Victoria's face had gone from crimson to white. For a moment, Isabella thought she might refuse, might create a scene. But something in the Marquess's expression, some hint of the commander who had led men through the horrors of war, made even Lady Victoria quail. "As you wish, my lord," she said through clenched teeth, "but I warn you, Isabella is not what she seems. She is dangerous." "So am I, Lady Victoria. Perhaps that is why we understand each other." When Lady Victoria had swept from the room in a cloud of outrage and black bombazine, the Marquess turned to Isabella. In the candlelight, his expression was softer than she had yet seen it. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "I did not mean to provoke such a scene." "You did not provoke it, my lord. The truth did." Isabella wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. "May I ask what you wish to discuss?" The Marquess was silent for a long moment, studying her with those penetrating grey eyes. Then he spoke, and his words changed everything. "3 fiancées, Lady Isabella. 3 women who agreed to marry me, and 3 who died before our wedding days." His voice was carefully devoid of emotion, but Isabella heard the pain beneath. "The first, Miss Catherine Hartwell, took ill at a house party and died within 2 days. The second, Lady Margaret Seton, collapsed at the opera. The third, Miss Lydia Pemberton, was found dead in her bedchamber the morning we were to sign the marriage contracts." Isabella stared at him, her breath catching. The rumours say I am cursed, that death follows me, that I murdered them." He turned away, gripping the mantle. "I spent 2 years in the peninsula, Lady Isabella. I saw men die in every conceivable way, but nothing prepared me for watching women I cared for, women who had agreed to share my life, die mysteriously, one after another." "You think—" Isabella's mind raced, pieces of a puzzle she had not known existed suddenly taking shape. "You think there is a connection between their deaths and Edmund's?" The Marquess turned back to face her, and in his eyes she saw something she recognised. The desperate hope of someone who had been condemned without proof, without justice. "I think," he said slowly, "that we are both victims of the same unseen enemy, and I propose, Lady Isabella, that we discover the truth together." Before Isabella could respond, a sound from the doorway made them both turn. Jameson stood there, his face pale. "My lord, my lady," he said quietly, urgently. "Forgive me, but you must know, Lady Victoria has retired to her chambers and is composing letters. I believe she means to spread word of your meeting tonight throughout society." The Marquess's jaw tightened. "Let her try. My reputation can sink no lower." "But mine can," Isabella whispered. She met the Marquess's gaze. "If word spreads that we met privately, that you showed me favour, Lady Victoria will use it as proof that I am exactly what she claims. A woman of loose morals who entraps men for their fortunes. Then we give her something even more scandalous to write about," the Marquess said. A reckless light had entered his eyes, the look of a man who had survived impossible battles and learned to gamble everything on desperate strategies. "My lord? Marry me, Lady Isabella." He spoke the words as a command, not a question. "A marriage of convenience, if you will. I need a wife to end these cursed rumours and restore my place in society. You need freedom from Lady Victoria's control and restoration of your good name. Together, we can investigate the truth of what happened to Edmund and my fiancées. And perhaps, if fortune favours us, we can both escape the prisons we have been living in." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. It was madness, complete and utter madness. To marry this cursed Marquess, this man she had met mere hours ago, to bind herself to him when she'd sworn never to marry again. Yet what was her alternative? to spend the rest of her life in grey dresses, tending a garden in isolation, slowly fading into nothing while Lady Victoria controlled her fortune and her fate. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you truly wish to marry, my lord? There must be other women, women without my stained reputation." "Because you are the first woman in 3 years who has looked at me without fear," he said simply. "Because you understand what it is to be condemned without proof, and because—" He paused, something vulnerable crossing his harsh features. "Because I am tired of being alone with my ghosts." Isabella understood that. God help her. She understood that all too well. "Then we have a bargain, my lord," she heard herself say. "I will marry you." Neither of them saw the shadow that detached itself from the hallway outside the drawing room, nor heard the soft, malicious laughter that drifted away into the darkness. Lady Victoria had heard everything, and she was already planning her response. Chapter 3. A Devil's Bargain. The morning after her agreement with the Marquess, Isabella woke to rain drumming against the windows of the dower house. Grey light filtered through the threadbare curtains, matching her grey dress, her grey mood, her grey existence, except that existence was about to change dramatically. She had agreed to marry a man called Cursed by society, a man suspected of murdering 3 women, a man she had known for less than 1 day. The practical part of her mind, the part that had survived Edmund's cruelties and Lady Victoria's persecution, whispered that she had run mad. But the part of her that still burned with defiance, the part that refused to accept that her life was over at 27, thrilled at the prospect. A sharp knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Her maid, Sally, one of only 2 servants Lady Victoria permitted her, entered with a breakfast tray and an expression of barely suppressed excitement. "My lady, such news! The Marquess has called and insists on seeing you in the rose garden, and Lady Victoria is in a fearful temper, saying terrible things about you both, but his lordship told her if she didn't hold her tongue, he'd—" Sally clapped her hand over her mouth. "Begging your pardon, my lady, I shouldn't repeat such." Isabella smiled despite herself. "You may tell me, Sally. I suspect I shall be hearing worse in the coming weeks. He told her that if she didn't hold her tongue, he'd see her turned out of Thornfield Manor within a fortnight, and that she'd best remember who held the power now." Sally's eyes were wide. "My lady, is it true? Are you really to marry the Marquess?" "It appears so." Isabella rose, moving to the washstand. "Though I confess I am still reconciling myself to the idea." "Oh, my lady," Sally clasped her hands together. "It's like something from a novel. The cursed lord and the widow in grey, finding each other in the darkness." "This is not a novel, Sally. This is a practical arrangement between 2 people who have been wronged by society." Yet even as she spoke the words, Isabella felt the lie in them. There had been nothing practical about the way the Marquess had looked at her last night, nothing businesslike in the quickening of her pulse when he commanded her presence. She dressed carefully, choosing the least worn of her grey dresses and pinning her hair severely back. If she was to meet with the Marquess, she would do so with dignity intact, even if everything else had been stripped away. The rose garden where they had first met looked even more melancholy in the rain. The Marquess stood beneath an ancient oak tree, apparently impervious to the weather, dressed in riding clothes of dark green that made his grey eyes seem even more penetrating. He turned as she approached, and that strange half-smile curved his lips. "Lady Isabella, you came. Did you doubt I would? I half expected you to have reconsidered in the cold light of day. It was a mad proposal, after all." "Perhaps I am mad," Isabella said. 3 years of isolation have that effect. "Then we shall be mad together." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation she took it. The warmth of him, the solid strength, sent an unexpected shock through her. She had not touched another person in so long. They walked slowly through the garden, rain pattering on the leaves above them. For several minutes, and neither spoke. "There are things you should know about me," the Marquess said finally, his voice low, "before you bind yourself to this arrangement. I know you are called Cursed. I know 3 women died. Not just died, they were murdered." He stopped walking, turning to face her. His expression was bleak. "I did not realise it at first. Catherine's death seemed like misfortune, Margaret's tragic coincidence. But after Lydia," he closed his eyes briefly. "After Lydia, I began to see the pattern. The symptoms were similar. The sudden illness, the violent seizures, the rapid death." "Poison," Isabella whispered. "Poison," he confirmed. "I went to the authorities, demanded investigations, hired private inquiries, but I was the common link between all 3 women. Suspicion fell on me. The investigations found nothing conclusive, but the damage was done. Society named me murderer, or cursed. They could not decide which was worse." Isabella's mind was racing. Edmund's death was the same. He fell ill suddenly after a dinner party. He experienced violent convulsions, claimed his throat was burning. The physician said it was his heart, but I saw how he suffered. It was no natural death. "Then we are hunting the same killer," the Marquess said grimly. "Someone who has murdered 4 people, 3 of my intended wives and your husband. Someone who uses poison and gets away with it because society is too eager to believe in curses and murderous widows. But why? What connects us? That is what we must discover." He resumed walking, drawing her with him deeper into the garden. "I have spent 2 years investigating on my own quietly, without success. But you may know things I do not. You lived here, in this house, when Edmund died." "Lady Victoria controlled everything," Isabella said slowly, remembering. "She planned the dinner party that night, selected the guests, oversaw the menu. She was always in control, even when Edmund was alive. He was her only child, and she—" Isabella paused, a memory surfacing. "She was obsessed with maintaining her position, her influence. Edmund told me once that she had been mistress to a powerful man in her youth, that she had never recovered from losing that status when he married elsewhere." The Marquess stopped walking so abruptly that Isabella stumbled. His hand shot out to steady her, gripping her arm. "What man?" His voice was sharp, urgent. "Did Edmund say who it was?" "He never spoke the name, only that the man was married now, had children, a title." Isabella searched her memory. "He said something about the old Marquess favouring her, giving her gifts, but then casting her aside when it became politically advantageous." The Marquess had gone pale beneath his tan. "The old Marquess, my father." Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. "Your father was Lady Victoria's lover." It would explain much. The Marquess released her arm, pacing away through the rain. "My father had many mistresses before he married my mother. He was notorious for it. And after my mother died when I was 10, he kept mistresses again. But I never knew their names. He was discreet in his own way. If Lady Victoria was his mistress, if she lost her position when he married—" Isabella's mind was constructing a terrible picture. "Could she be seeking revenge against your family, against you, by killing my fiancés?" The Marquis shook his head. "It seems extreme, and it does not explain Edmund's death." "Unless Edmund discovered something," Isabella said slowly, "unless he learned of her connection to your father and threatened to expose her. She values her reputation above all things. If society knew she had been cast aside by a Marquess, it would destroy the image of respectability she has spent decades building," the Marquis finished. He turned back to face her. rain streaming down his face. This is speculation. We have no proof. Then we gather proof, Isabella said fiercely. That is what you proposed, is it not? A marriage of convenience to provide cover for our investigation. And if we fail, if we cannot prove her guilt, we will still be married, Lady Isabella, bound together in the eyes of God and society. Then we will be bound, Isabella said. I am already living a life sentence in this place. At least, married to you, I will have a chance at freedom, at truth, at... She hesitated, then spoke the word that terrified her. At life. Something changed in the Marquess's expression. The hardness softened, and for a moment, Isabella saw the man behind the curse, behind the military bearing, behind the walls he had constructed. Very well, he said quietly. Then let us make this formal. I have a special license in my possession. I took the liberty of obtaining it yesterday in the village. We can be married within days if you consent. Days? Isabella's heart hammered. So soon? Every day we delay is another day for Victoria to act against us. She will try to stop this marriage, Lady Isabella. She will use every weapon in her arsenal to keep you under her control. As if summoned by the speaking of her name, a figure appeared at the edge of the garden. Lady Victoria, dressed in her eternal black, carrying a large umbrella. Her face was composed, but her eyes glittered with malice. How touching, she called out, her voice carrying through the rain. The cursed Marquess and the poisoner plotting in the garden. What a pair you make. The Marquess stepped in front of Isabella, his body forming a barrier between her and her mother-in-law. The gesture was protective, possessive, and Isabella felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Lady Victoria, the Marquess said coldly, you are not wanted here. I am the mistress of this estate, my lord. Everywhere here is my domain. Lady Victoria's smile was venomous. But I came to deliver news. I have written to my solicitors. Lady Isabella's confinement here is legally binding under the terms of Edmund's will until such time as her innocence is proven. You cannot simply steal her away like some knight-errant. Edmund's will left everything to Lady Isabella, the Marquess said. I have taken the liberty of examining the documents. There is no provision for her confinement. There is a provision stating that should questions arise regarding his death, the estate should be held in trust until those questions are resolved. I am the trustee. Lady Victoria's smile widened. You see, my lord, I protected myself quite thoroughly. Isabella will never be free of me. She will be when she becomes my wife, the Marquis said quietly, dangerously. And I assure you, Lady Victoria, that will happen within the week. Lady Victoria's composure cracked. You cannot. I will not allow. You have no power to prevent it. Isabella is a widow of age and free to make her own choices. She murdered my son. Prove it. The Marquis's voice cut like a blade. Bring your evidence, Lady Victoria. Present it to the authorities, or admit that you have kept an innocent woman imprisoned for 3 years based on nothing more than malicious gossip and your own desire for control. Isabella found her voice, stepping out from behind the Marquess. I will marry Lord Ravencroft, Victoria, and there is nothing you can do to stop me. For a moment, pure hatred flashed across Lady Victoria's face, so intense that Isabella took an involuntary step back. Then, as if a mask had fallen into place, her expression smoothed into cold disdain. Very well, she said softly. Marry your cursed Marquess, Isabella. But know this, you will regret it. Both of you will regret it. I will see to that personally. She turned and swept away through the rain, leaving Isabella and the Marquess standing in the garden, the weight of her threat hanging between them like a curse. She will try to kill you, Isabella said flatly. Before the wedding. She cannot allow you to marry me and take me beyond her control. Let her try. The Marquess's smile was grim. I survived 6 years of war, Lady Isabella. I did not do so by being easy to kill. Isabella looked up at him. This man who had appeared in her life like a storm. This Marquess who carried his own curse. Rain dripped from his dark hair, ran down his scarred face, and she thought he had never looked more vital, more real than in this moment. We are mad to do this, she whispered. Undoubtedly. He offered his hand. Shall we be mad together then? Isabella took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. She had forgotten what it felt like to touch someone without fear, without calculation, without the weight of expectations and duty. Together, she agreed. Neither of them saw the figure watching from an upper window of the manor house, or the way Lady Victoria's hands clenched on the sill as she observed them. But if they had, they would have seen the smile on her lips, the cold satisfaction in her eyes. Let them think they had won. Let them plan their wedding, their investigation, their future. She had been playing this game far longer than either of them, and she had no intention of losing, not when she was so close to having everything she had ever wanted. Chapter 4. Threads of Conspiracy. The library of Ravencroft Hall was a magnificent room of mahogany and leather, filled with books collected over 3 generations. Isabella stood at the window, watching storm clouds gather over the northern moors, and tried to reconcile the fact that she was now, officially, betrothed to the man pacing behind her like a caged wolf. Their engagement had been announced 3 days ago. The response from society had been everything they expected and worse. Another one, the Marquess, Alexander, she must learn to call him Alexander, said, tossing a letter onto the growing pile. Lady Pemberton writes to inform me that I am a monster who should be driven from civilized society, and that announcing an engagement to another poor victim before the year is out proves my utter depravity. Lady Pemberton's daughter was your 3rd fiancée, Isabella observed quietly. Lydia. Alexander's voice softened. She was kind. Too kind for this world, perhaps. She deserved better than... He did not finish. Isabella turned from the window. They had been working together for 3 days, reviewing documents, comparing timelines, interviewing servants. Alexander had proven to be a meticulous investigator, his military training evident in the systematic way he approached the problem. But they had yet to find the proof they needed. Tell me about the dinner party again, Alexander said, moving to a large table where he had laid out papers covered in his precise handwriting. The night Edmund died. Isabella closed her eyes, forcing herself to remember. It was September, 3 years ago. Lady Victoria insisted on hosting a gathering to celebrate Edmund's birthday. She invited 12 guests, local gentry mostly. The Harrisons, the Blackwoods, Dr. Pemberton and his wife. Dr. Pemberton, Alexander interrupted, related to the Lady Pemberton who just wrote to denounce me? I do not know. There are many Pembertons in the county. Add it to the list of things to investigate. Alexander made a note. Continue. The dinner was elaborate. 6 courses. Lady Victoria had been planning it for weeks. She supervised every detail. The menu, the seating arrangements, even the flowers. Isabella opened her eyes. Edmund was in excellent health that morning. He had ridden for 3 hours and eaten a hearty breakfast. But by midnight, he was dead. Which course did he take ill during? The 4th, roasted lamb with mint sauce. He took 1 bite and immediately complained that his throat burned. At first, we thought perhaps the sauce was too strong. But then, She wrapped her arms around herself, remembering Edmund's convulsions, his screams. He collapsed. Dr. Pemberton tried to help him, but there was nothing to be done. And the doctor ruled it a heart seizure? Yes, he said Edmund had always had a weak constitution, that the excitement of the party had overtaxed his heart. Did Edmund have a weak constitution? Isabella hesitated. No, he was robust, healthy. He rode daily, boxed at gentlemen's clubs in London. His heart was strong. Yet the doctor lied. Alexander's eyes were hard, or was mistaken. We need to speak with this Dr. Pemberton. Lady Victoria will have warned him of our suspicions. Then we approach him carefully. Alexander moved to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she could smell his cologne, sandalwood, and something darker, more masculine. We have one advantage, Isabella. Victoria believes we are merely two pariahs seeking respectability through marriage. She does not know we are actively investigating. Does she not? Isabella met his gaze. She is clever, Alexander. She has evaded justice for 3 years. Longer, if she truly killed your fiancés. We underestimate her at our peril. Before Alexander could respond, the library door opened. Jameson entered, his weathered face grave. My lord, my lady, forgive the interruption, but you have a visitor. He refuses to give his name, but insists he has information regarding... The butler hesitated. Regarding the deaths. Alexander and Isabella exchanged glances. Show him in, Jameson, but remain nearby. Of course, my lord. The man who entered was elderly, perhaps 70, with the stooped posture of one who has spent his life bent over a workbench. His clothes were shabby but clean, and his hands trembled as he removed his cap. My lord, my lady, he said in a voice roughened by age and perhaps fear. My name is Thomas Keene. I am an apothecary. Or was, before... He swallowed hard. Before I left London in disgrace. Isabella's pulse quickened. An apothecary? Yes, my lady. I had a shop in Cheapside for 40 years, a respectable business, a good reputation. His hands twisted his cap. Until 3 years ago, when I was accused of selling poison to a customer who used it for murder. The charges were eventually dropped for lack of evidence, but my business was ruined. I came north to escape the scandal. What poison? Alexander's voice was sharp. White arsenic, my lord, mixed with extract of hemlock. A particularly nasty combination, causes burning in the throat, violent convulsions, death within hours. The authorities said it had been used in 3 murders in London over the course of 2 years. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. 3 murders? Young women, my lady, all engaged to be married. The papers called it the bride-killer murders. Thomas Keene's eyes filled with tears. I swear on my mother's grave, I never sold poison knowingly. But someone used my shop to acquire it, and I have spent 3 years trying to discover who. Alexander had gone very still. The dates of these murders, do you remember them? I'll never forget them, my lord. They cost me everything. The old man recited the dates, and Isabella watched Alexander's face go white, as recognition dawned. Catherine Hartwell, Lady Margaret Seton, Miss Lydia Pemberton. God in heaven, Alexander whispered. It was the same killer, all 3, someone in London. But Edmund died here in the country, Isabella said. How could... The killer came here, Alexander said grimly, or sent the poison. Tell me, Mr. Keene, did you ever discover who purchased the arsenic from your shop? The old apothecary reached into his coat with shaking hands and withdrew a worn leather journal. I kept records, my lord. Meticulous records of every sale, every customer. The authorities examined them, of course, but found nothing suspicious. Yet, I have spent 3 years reviewing them, searching for patterns. And I believe... He opened the journal, his finger tracing down a page. I believe the poison was purchased under false names, but always by the same person. A woman. How do you know it was a woman if the names were false? Isabella asked. Because of this, my lady. He pointed to a notation in the margin. I marked when customers paid with coins versus banknotes. These purchases were always paid for with a specific type of coin, gold sovereigns, freshly minted, unusual for common folk. And the handwriting on the purchase orders, though disguised, had certain characteristics. The curl of the G, the cross of the T. I was trained by my father to notice such things. It helps prevent fraud. Alexander took the journal, studying it intently. You believe you can identify this woman's true handwriting if you see it again. I would stake my life on it, my lord. Why come to us now? Isabella asked. Why not go to the authorities? Thomas Keen's expression turned bitter. I did, my lady, repeatedly. But I am a disgraced apothecary with no proof beyond an old man's observations. They dismissed me. Then I heard of your betrothal, heard the rumours that you were both accused of these very murders. And I thought... His voice broke. I thought perhaps we could help each other. Perhaps together we could find justice. Alexander looked at Isabella. In his eyes she saw the question. Do we trust him? She thought of 3 years in isolation, of grey dresses and stolen inheritance, of a mother-in-law who controlled everything with an iron fist. She thought of Alexander's 3 dead fiancées, of Edmund's burning throat, of a killer who walked free while innocents were condemned. We trust him, she said. Then we have an alliance, Alexander said, extending his hand to the old apothecary. Help us identify the killer's handwriting, Mr. Keen, and I swear you will have your justice and your reputation restored. There is one more thing, my lord. Thomas Keen hesitated. The gold sovereigns used to purchase the poison. I noticed something about them. They bore a particular mint mark, one used only for a brief period in 1808. It's possible to trace who might have had access to such coins. The aristocracy, Isabella said slowly. Anyone who was in London in 1808. Anyone with wealth and connections. Lady Victoria was in London in 1808, Alexander said quietly. My father was still alive then. She would have been visiting him, collecting her payments. The pieces were falling into place, but they still needed proof. They needed Victoria's handwriting, needed to place her in London at the times the poison was purchased, needed to connect her definitively to the crimes. We will need to search Thornfield Manor, Isabella said. Victoria keeps extensive correspondence, journals. If she purchased the poison, there may be evidence in her papers. She will never permit us to search her chambers, Alexander objected. Then we must find a way to get her out of the house. A plan was forming in Isabella's mind, reckless but possible. The Blackwoods are hosting their annual ball in 4 days. Victoria always attends. It's the social event of the season. If we can ensure she goes, we will have several hours to search. And how do we ensure she attends when she knows we are investigating? Isabella smiled grimly. We give her exactly what she wants. We announce that we will be attending the ball ourselves, that we plan to face society together. Victoria will not be able to resist the opportunity to watch us be humiliated. It's dangerous, Alexander said. She may try something at the ball itself. Then we will be ready. Isabella felt the old fire burning in her chest again, the defiance that had sustained her through 3 years of imprisonment. I am tired of hiding, Alexander, tired of being afraid. If we are to catch a killer, we must be willing to take risks. Alexander studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. We attend the Blackwood Ball. We play the part of the Cursed Marquess and his scandalous bride, and while Victoria watches us fail, Mr. Keene and Jameson will search her chambers. I will not fail you, my lord, Thomas Keene said fervently. See that you do not. All our lives may depend on it. After the apothecary had been shown to a guest room and provided with dinner, Isabella and Alexander remained in the library. The rain had begun again, drumming against the windows, creating an intimate cocoon of sound. 4 days, Isabella said softly. 4 days until the ball, until we confront her. Are you frightened? She considered the question honestly. Yes, but I am more frightened of living the rest of my life as a prisoner, of never knowing the truth. I will protect you, Alexander said. Whatever happens at that ball, I swear it. And who will protect you? She turned to face him fully. You have been living under this curse for 3 years, Alexander. What if we fail? What if we cannot prove Victoria's guilt? Then we will still have each other. He moved closer and Isabella's breath caught. These past 3 days, working with you, speaking with someone who understands, I have felt more alive than I have in years. As have I, Isabella whispered. For a moment, they stood inches apart, and Isabella felt the pull between them, felt something shifting from practical alliance to something far more dangerous. She had not expected this, had not planned to feel anything for the man who had commanded her presence in a garden 4 days ago, but she did feel. God help her, she did. Alexander seemed to sense her thoughts. He reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat, and touched her cheek. His hand was warm, calloused from riding and sword work, gentle despite his warrior's strength. When this is over, he said quietly, when Victoria is brought to justice and the curse is lifted, I would like to court you properly, Isabella. Not as a matter of convenience, but as a man courts a woman he admires. A woman he paused, as if the words were difficult. A woman he is beginning to care for deeply. Isabella's eyes filled with unexpected tears. Alexander, you need not answer now, but know that whatever happens, whatever comes, you are not alone anymore. Neither of us is. He bent and pressed a kiss to her forehead, chaste and yet somehow more intimate than any kiss she had received in her marriage. Then he stepped back, his expression once more controlled, military. Rest tonight. In 4 days we face our enemy. We must be ready. Isabella nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She left the library, her heart pounding, her mind whirling with plans and fears, and something that felt dangerously like hope. Behind her, Alexander stood at the window, watching lightning crack across the northern sky. In 4 days, they would face Lady Victoria. In 4 days, the truth would finally emerge. He only prayed they would both survive to see it. Chapter 5. The Unmasking. The Blackwood estate blazed with light, every window glowing like a beacon against the autumn darkness. Carriages lined the drive, disgorging passengers dressed in their finest silks and superfine. The annual Blackwood Ball was the social event of the season, and it seemed all of society had turned out to witness the scandal. The cursed Marquess of Ravencroft and his murderous bride-to-be appearing together in public for the first time. Isabella sat in Alexander's carriage, her hands clenched in her lap, fighting the urge to flee. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk, the first true colour she had worn in 3 years. Alexander had commissioned it specially, along with emeralds for her throat that had belonged to his mother. "You look magnificent," he said quietly from across the carriage. He was resplendent in black evening clothes, the scar on his cheek somehow adding to rather than detracting from his austere handsomeness. I look like a woman playing dress-up, Isabella countered. I have forgotten how to be a part of society, Alexander. Good. Society does not deserve you as you truly are. He leaned forward, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. Remember, this is theatre. We are performing for Victoria, drawing her attention while Jameson and Mr. Keene search her chambers. Can you do this? Isabella thought of 3 years in grey dresses, 3 years of isolation and accusation. She thought of Alexander's dead fiancés, of Edmund's poisoned body, of a killer who walked free while innocents suffered. I can do this, she said firmly. The carriage halted. A footman opened the door, and suddenly they were exposed to the glittering crowd. Isabella heard the gasps, felt hundreds of eyes fix upon them. The whispers started immediately, a susurrus of scandal that followed them up the steps. The cursed Marquess. That's the woman who poisoned her husband. How dare they show their faces? Alexander's hand tightened on hers. Hold your head high, he murmured. You are Lady Isabella Grayson, and you have done nothing wrong. They entered the ballroom, and the whispers grew to a roar. People stepped back as they passed, as if murder and curses might be contagious. Isabella felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she kept her chin up, her spine straight. And then she saw Lady Victoria. Her mother-in-law stood near the refreshment table, dressed in her customary black, surrounded by a coterie of society matrons. Her expression was triumphant, satisfied, as she watched Isabella's entrance. This was what she had wanted, to see Isabella humiliated, to watch her attempt to re-enter society and fail, to prove, once and for all, that Isabella's reputation was destroyed beyond redemption. She is enjoying this, Isabella whispered to Alexander. Let her. While she watches us, she is not watching Thornfield Manor. Lord and Lady Blackwood approached, their expressions carefully neutral. Lord Blackwood was a portly man of 60, his wife a thin, nervous woman who clutched her fan like a weapon. Lord Ravencroft, Lord Blackwood said stiffly, we were surprised to receive your acceptance and to learn of your betrothal. Were you? Alexander's tone could have cut glass. How curious, as I sent the announcement to all appropriate parties, including the Times. Yes, well, Lady Blackwood's fan fluttered faster. It is most irregular, given the circumstances. What circumstances would those be? Alexander asked softly, dangerously. Please, enlighten me. The Blackwoods exchanged glances. No one wanted to openly accuse a Marquess of murder, but everyone thought it. Perhaps we should not discuss such matters here, Lord Blackwood said finally. You are our guests, after all. How gracious, Isabella said, finding her voice. The emeralds at her throat felt like armour. Tell me, Lady Blackwood, do you still serve lamb with mint sauce at your dinners? I find I have lost my taste for it. Lady Blackwood paled, recognising the reference to the meal at which Edmund had died. Before she could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. Isabella, how unexpected to see you here. Lady Victoria glided toward them, her smile venomous. She looked between Isabella and Alexander, and something calculating moved behind her eyes. Mother Victoria, Isabella said coolly, I trust you are well? As well as can be expected, given that my daughter-in-law has chosen to align herself with a man whose very presence invites death. Lady Victoria turned to Alexander. Lord Ravencroft, I wonder, does Lady Isabella know the full extent of your curse? The details of how your fiancés died? I know everything, Isabella said before Alexander could respond. Just as Lord Ravencroft knows everything about Edmund's death, we have no secrets between us. A flash of something, alarm, crossed Lady Victoria's face before her smile returned. How modern. I suppose when one is already ruined, there is little point in discretion. Is that why you have chosen such public vengeance? Alexander asked. Because discretion serves no purpose when one has already destroyed lives. Lady Victoria's eyes narrowed. I have no idea what you mean, my lord. Do you not? Alexander took a step closer to her, and Isabella saw several people in the crowd shift nervously. Tell me, Lady Victoria, where were you in the autumn of 1814, or the spring of 1815? The colour drained from Lady Victoria's face. Those were the dates when Alexander's first two fiancées had died. I am sure I was at Thornfield Manor. Where else would I be? Where else, indeed? Alexander's smile was cold. Perhaps we should discuss this matter more privately. There is much I would ask you about your past, your connections, your purchases. Isabella saw panic flash across Lady Victoria's face, quickly suppressed. She knows, Isabella thought. She knows we are investigating, knows we are close to the truth. I will not be interrogated by you, Lady Victoria hissed. You forget yourself, my lord. You may have a title, but you are still a murderer in the eyes of society. As you have ensured, my fiancée remains a suspected murderess. Alexander's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. But I wonder, Lady Victoria, what will society think when they learn the truth? When they discover who truly wielded the poison? Lady Victoria's composure cracked completely. You have no proof. No one will believe the ramblings of a cursed Marquess and his whore. The insult hung in the air. Around them, the crowd had gone silent, straining to hear. Alexander's hand went to where his sword would have been, remembered instinct from his military days. But Isabella touched his arm, staying him. No, she said quietly. She wants you to create a scene, wants witnesses to your violence. Alexander forced himself to relax, but his eyes never left Lady Victoria's face. You are quite right, my dear. We should not waste our time on such desperate provocations. Come, I believe the dancing is about to begin. He led Isabella onto the floor as the orchestra struck up a waltz. Around them, couples backed away, unwilling to dance near the cursed pair. They were left in a circle of empty space, alone in the centre of the ballroom. She is frightened, Isabella whispered as they began to dance. Did you see her face when you mentioned her purchases? She knows we are close, which means she will act. Alexander's arm tightened around her waist. We must be careful, Isabella. A cornered predator is most dangerous. They danced in silence for a moment, and despite the hostile stares, despite the whispers and the danger, Isabella felt something shift inside her. 3 years she had been dead to the world. 3 years in grey dresses and isolation. But here, now, in emerald silk and her intended's arms, she felt alive. Whatever happens tonight, she said softly, thank you for seeing me, for believing me. Isabella? A commotion at the ballroom entrance interrupted him. Dr. Pemberton had arrived, and he was not alone. He was accompanied by a woman Isabella recognised, the mother of Lydia Pemberton, Alexander's third fiancée, and they were making directly for Lady Victoria. Something is wrong, Alexander said, already moving. They crossed the ballroom swiftly, catching the tail end of an agitated conversation. Cannot continue this charade, Dr. Pemberton was saying, his face flushed with drink and agitation. I have held my tongue for 3 years, but I will not be party to attempted murder. Lower your voice, you fool! Lady Victoria hissed, her eyes darting around the crowded ballroom. What is the meaning of this? Alexander demanded, his military authority silencing the nearby conversations. Dr. Pemberton turned to him, and Isabella saw guilt and fear warring in the man's expression. My lord, I must speak with you, privately, There are things you must know. Then speak here, now, in front of witnesses, Alexander commanded. I am weary of secrets and lies. The doctor swallowed hard, glancing at Lady Victoria, who had gone pale as death. 3 years ago, I falsified my report on Edmund Grayson's death. I stated he died of heart failure, but I knew, God help me, I knew it was poison. Lady Victoria paid me to lie, threatened to expose certain indiscretions if I did not comply. The ballroom erupted in gasps and exclamations. Lady Victoria lunged toward the doctor, but Alexander caught her arm in an iron grip. "Release me!" she shrieked. "He is lying! He is a drunk and a charlatan!" "I am a coward," Dr. Pemberton interrupted, his voice breaking. "But I am not a murderer, and I will not stand by while you attempt the same crime again." "Again?" Isabella's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, again?" Lydia Pemberton's mother stepped forward, her face ravaged by grief and righteous fury. "Show them," she said to the doctor. "Show them what we found." Dr. Pemberton withdrew a small vial from his pocket with trembling hands. Even from a distance, Isabella could see the white powder within. "I was called to Thornfield Manor this afternoon," the doctor said, his voice shaking. "Lady Victoria requested I examine a medication she intended to administer to Lady Isabella for her nerves. She claimed Lady Isabella had been agitated of late, prone to fits. She wanted my professional opinion on the dosage." "But it was not medication," Mrs. Pemberton said, her voice shaking with fury. "My late husband was a chemist before he turned to medicine. When Dr. Pemberton showed it to me, I recognized the mixture immediately. White arsenic and hemlock extract, the same poison that killed my daughter." The ballroom exploded into chaos. Ladies shrieked and fainted. Men shouted. And at the centre of it all, Lady Victoria stood rigid, her mask finally shattered, her face contorted with hatred and desperation. "They were obstacles!" she screamed suddenly, the words tearing from her throat with years of accumulated venom. "All of them! Catherine and Margaret and Lydia. They would have married him, would have given him heirs, would have made his family stronger and left me with nothing. And Edmund, my fool of a son, discovered my connection to the old Marquess, threatened to expose me, to ruin everything I had built." "Dear God," Isabella whispered, stunned by the public confession. "It was all true, all of it. For 30 years I was nothing." Lady Victoria's voice had become shrill, unhinged, all pretense of sanity abandoned. "Cast aside by the old Marquess when he found a younger, prettier wife to give him legitimate heirs, forced to marry beneath me, to endure a loveless union, to watch from the shadows while he built his dynasty with another woman. But I had power still. I had influence, had money he sent me to ensure my silence. And I would not let his precious son escape me, would not let Alexander Thorne build the same happy family that was denied to me." Alexander's face had gone white. "You killed them because of my father, because he rejected you?" "I killed them because they were not worthy," Lady Victoria shrieked, spittle flying from her lips. "Because no one was worthy of the Ravencroft name except those I chose. And when your father died, I thought perhaps you would turn to me, would seek my counsel, would give me the position I deserved as one who had loved your father. But you looked for other wives, other women, and so I removed them, one by one, until you learned to stop trying." "And Edmund?" Isabella's voice was barely audible over the roaring in her ears. "Why did you kill your own son?" Lady Victoria's laugh was bitter, broken, the sound of sanity finally fracturing. "He was going to cut me off. Said he knew about the old Marquess, about the payments, about my shameful past. He was going to tell society, going to humiliate me unless I surrendered control of the Grayson fortune. So I poisoned him at his own birthday dinner and let you take the blame. You were convenient, Isabella, the perfect scapegoat, young, beautiful, resented by the servants I had turned against you." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the orchestra had stopped playing. Every eye in the ballroom was fixed on Lady Victoria, on the mad confession spilling from her lips like poison from an overturned vial. "And tonight?" Alexander asked quietly, his voice deadly calm. "You intended to poison Isabella tonight?" "I intended to finish what I started," Lady Victoria screamed, all control abandoned. She was supposed to die years ago, languish and fade away in that dower house. But she survived, the stubborn creature. And now she has you to protect her. You who should have been mine to control. She lunged for Isabella, something glinting in her hand. A small knife, Isabella realised with detached horror. Lady Victoria had brought a knife to the ball, concealed in her reticule. But Alexander was faster. Years of battlefield reflexes saved them both. He caught Lady Victoria's wrist, twisting until the knife clattered to the marble floor. Guards rushed forward, seizing her, dragging her away as she shrieked and cursed, all pretense of sanity abandoned. Isabella stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. 3 years of accusations, 3 years of imprisonment, and now vindication. Horrible, public, complete vindication. "It's over," Alexander said, pulling her into his arms regardless of the hundreds of witnesses. "Isabella, it's over. She confessed. Everyone heard." Isabella began to shake, great tremors running through her body. She was vaguely aware of people rushing forward, of apologies and exclamations, of Lord Blackwood calling for the magistrate. But all she could focus on was Alexander's solid warmth, his arms around her, his voice murmuring assurances. "You are free," he whispered against her hair. "We both are. The curse is lifted." And as the ballroom erupted into chaos around them, Isabella finally allowed herself to cry. Tears of relief, of grief for the years stolen from her, of joy at being finally believed. The nightmare was over. The truth had prevailed. And somewhere in the midst of the chaos, Isabella realised that she had fallen completely, irrevocably in love with the man who held her. Chapter 6. Justice and Truth. The magistrate arrived within the hour, along with representatives from the Crown. Lady Victoria was taken into custody, still raving about injustices and betrayals, about how she had loved the old Marquess and been cast aside like refuse. Dr. Pemberton gave a full statement, confessing his role in the cover-up of Edmund's murder, though he swore he had never knowingly assisted in any other killings. Thomas Keene was summoned from Thornfield Manor, where his search of Lady Victoria's chambers had yielded a treasure trove of evidence. Letters detailing her decades-long affair with Alexander's father. Receipts for gold sovereigns exchanged at specific dates that matched precisely with the poison purchases from Keene's shop. And most damning of all, a journal in Lady Victoria's own meticulous hand, documenting her crimes with chilling precision. She had written it all down, her rage at being cast aside, her determination to prevent Alexander from finding happiness, her cold calculation in choosing Isabella as a scapegoat. It was the record of a woman consumed by bitterness, who had twisted love into obsession and grief into murder. By dawn, Lady Victoria had been formally charged with 4 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. The evidence was overwhelming. Her own public confession before 200 witnesses, combined with the physical proof from her chambers and Dr. Pemberton's testimony, left no possibility of doubt. Isabella stood in the Blackwood Conservatory as the sun rose, watching the light break over the autumn gardens. She had not slept. None of them had. But she felt strangely peaceful, as if a weight she had carried for 3 interminable years had finally been lifted from her shoulders. "My lady?" Jameson appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern, and something that might have been joy. "There are matters that require your attention. The Thornfield estate, it legally reverts to you now. Lady Victoria's trusteeship was predicated on the suspicion of your guilt. With her confession, I am free to claim my inheritance," Isabella finished. She turned to face the loyal butler who had never stopped believing in her innocence. "And you, Jameson, will you remain at Thornfield if I ask it of you?" "If you wish it, my lady, I would be honoured. Though I confess I would understand if you chose to abandon that cursed place forever." Isabella considered. Thornfield Manor held 3 years of painful memories, of isolation, of grey dresses, of stolen life. But it also held the rose garden where she had first met Alexander, the library where they had planned their investigation, the gardens she had tended with her own hands during the darkest years of her life. "I do not think I could abandon it entirely," she said slowly, "but neither could I live there. Not yet. Perhaps," she paused, an idea forming in her mind, "perhaps it could be put to better use. A refuge, perhaps, for women wrongly accused, a place where they might find safety and support while they fight for justice." Jameson's eyes shone with unshed tears. "Lady Isabella, that would be a fine legacy indeed, a way to transform tragedy into hope." "Something good should come from all this suffering," Isabella said firmly. "If not for me, then for others who find themselves condemned without proof." "You have a generous heart, my lady." Jameson bowed deeply. "I will see to the arrangements with pleasure." After he left, Isabella remained in the conservatory, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. She had survived. Against all odds, against 3 years of condemnation and isolation, she had survived and won. But at what cost? 4 people were dead. 4 innocent people whose only crime had been to cross Lady Victoria's twisted path. Catherine Hartwell, Lady Margaret Seton, Miss Lydia Pemberton, and Edmund Grayson, their lives cut short by poison and jealousy, and one woman's inability to accept rejection. "Isabella?" She turned to find Alexander in the doorway. He looked exhausted, his evening clothes rumpled, his dark hair dishevelled, the scar on his cheek standing out starkly against his pale skin. But his eyes were soft as they rested on her. "You should rest," he said, moving into the conservatory. "I cannot. Every time I close my eyes, I see—" She swallowed hard. "I see Edmund dying. I hear him screaming, and I think about how I spent 3 years believing I was responsible somehow, that I had failed him. You did not fail him. Victoria killed him, and then she let you bear the guilt." Alexander reached out, hesitating only a moment before gently taking her hand. "But it is over now, Isabella. She will pay for her crimes." "Will she? Or will they simply call her mad and lock her away?" Isabella's voice was bitter, with the cynicism 3 years of injustice had taught her. "The aristocracy protects its own, Alexander. You know this as well as I. The Crown has taken a direct interest in the case. 4 murders of nobility cannot be ignored, even if the perpetrator is one of their own." He squeezed her hand gently. "Justice will be served. I will make certain of it. I have already sent word to my connections in London." Isabella looked at him, this man who had been a stranger mere days ago, who had commanded her presence in a garden and changed her life forever. "What happens now? To us?" "That depends on you." Alexander's expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the hope and fear warring in his storm-grey eyes. Our betrothal was announced publicly. Society now knows you are innocent, that the accusations against you were manufactured lies. You could withdraw from our arrangement with complete honour. Return to your rightful place in society as a wronged widow, vindicated. No one would blame you for choosing freedom after 3 years of imprisonment. Is that what you want? Isabella asked quietly. What I want? Alexander's voice roughened with emotion. What I want is irrelevant. You have been controlled by others for too long, Isabella. By Edmund during your marriage, by Victoria during your imprisonment, by the weight of false accusations. I will not be another man who traps you, who takes away your choices. And if I choose not to be trapped, but rather to stay of my own free will? Isabella stepped closer to him, her heart pounding. What then, my lord? Alexander's breath caught audibly. Then I would count myself the most fortunate of men. But Isabella, you must be certain. We barely know each other. This past week has been extraordinary circumstances, danger and investigation and desperation. In the ordinary world, with time to think clearly, you might find... Isabella silenced him by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. For a heartbeat, Alexander stood frozen, clearly shocked. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close as he deepened the kiss. It was nothing like the chaste, dutiful kisses she'd received from Edmund. This was passion and promise, heat and hope, the kiss of a man who had been denied love for too long and was finally permitted to feel. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, their faces flushed. I am certain, Isabella said firmly, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. These may have been extraordinary circumstances, but they revealed your true character, Alexander. You could have abandoned me when Victoria threatened your reputation further. You could have used me merely as a tool for your investigation and then discarded me. But instead, you saw me. You believed me when no one else would. You gave me back my life. You gave me mine, Alexander countered, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with infinite tenderness. For 3 years, I have been cursed, isolated, convinced I would never be free of the shadow that followed me. I stopped believing in justice, in truth, in the possibility of happiness. But you walked into that shadow unafraid. You reminded me what it was to live rather than merely survive. Then we are agreed, Isabella said, a genuine smile breaking across her face for the first time in what felt like years. We shall marry, not as a matter of convenience or investigation, but because we choose each other. Because we choose each other, Alexander echoed, his own smile transforming his austere features into something approaching joy. Though I warn you, the Cursed Marquess comes with considerable baggage, a drafty estate in the north, an unfortunate reputation for being difficult, a tendency to order rather than request, and a scar that makes him look distinguished rather than dangerous. Isabella interrupted, tracing the mark on his cheek with gentle fingers, and eyes that see truth rather than accepting convenient lies, and a heart that, while guarded, beats true and loyal. Alexander laughed, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. You make me sound far better than I am, my dear. You make me sound far stronger than I feel, Isabella countered. So perhaps we shall make each other better. Is that not what marriage should be? That is what marriage should be, Alexander agreed softly. He pulled her close again, holding her as the sun rose fully over the gardens, bathing them both in golden light. A partnership of equals, a refuge from the world's cruelties, a place where two damaged souls can heal together. They stood there in silence for a long moment, simply holding each other, letting the reality of their freedom sink in. A discreet cough from the doorway interrupted them. Jameson stood there, his expression carefully neutral, despite the twinkle in his eye. "Forgive the interruption, my lord, my lady, but Lord Blackwood requests your presence in the study. The magistrate wishes to take your final statements, and there are other matters that require attention." "Other matters?" Alexander asked, his arm still around Isabella's waist. "Mr. Thomas Keene has made a rather extraordinary discovery among Lady Victoria's papers, my lord. He believes you both should see it immediately." Isabella and Alexander exchanged glances, then followed Jameson through the quiet house. Most of the ball guests had departed at dawn, shocked and scandalised by the night's revelations. But a few remained: Lord and Lady Blackwood, the magistrate, Dr. Pemberton looking thoroughly wretched, and Mrs. Pemberton, whose grief-stricken face showed the first signs of closure after 3 years of mourning her daughter. Thomas Keene sat at Lord Blackwood's desk, surrounded by papers and ledgers, his elderly face animated with discovery. "My lord, my lady," he said, rising as they entered, "I have been examining Lady Victoria's financial records, cross-referencing them with my own shop ledgers, and I have found something significant." He spread several documents across the desk. Lady Victoria kept meticulous records of every sovereign she received from the old Marquess. And look, his gnarled finger traced a column of figures. She received payments quarterly for nearly 30 years, substantial sums, enough to maintain Thornfield Manor and live comfortably. "My father paid her well for her silence," Alexander said grimly. "Indeed, my lord. But look at this." Keene pointed to another ledger. "These are her personal expenditures, and here, marked only as special purchases, are withdrawals that correspond exactly to the dates poison was purchased from my shop. The amounts match precisely, down to the shilling." "She used my father's money to buy the poison that killed my fiancées," Alexander said slowly, his voice hollow with the horror of it. "God in heaven! There is more, my lord." Keene's expression was troubled. "I found correspondence between Lady Victoria and someone else. Letters that suggest she was not working alone, at least not in gathering information about your fiancés. Someone provided her with details about their habits, their schedules, their favourite foods and drinks." "Who?" Isabella demanded. Keene held up a letter, the handwriting cramped and careful. The letters are signed only with initials, D.P., but given the medical knowledge displayed and the references to patient consultations— "Dr. Pemberton," Mrs. Pemberton said flatly, turning to stare at the physician with cold fury, "you did not merely cover up Edmund's death. You helped her plan the others." Dr. Pemberton had gone grey as ash. I never knew she would kill them," he stammered. "She said she only wanted information, said she was concerned for his lordship's welfare, wanted to ensure he married appropriately. I thought, God help me, I thought she was merely being a concerned family friend." "A concerned family friend does not need to know which foods a young woman prefers, or when she takes her evening constitutional alone," Alexander said, his voice dangerously soft. "You provided Victoria with the means to murder my fiancés, Doctor, whether you understood her intentions or not." "I swear I did not know." The doctor's voice rose in panic. "When Catherine died, I thought it coincidence. When Margaret died, I began to suspect, but Victoria said it was God's judgment, that your family was cursed for your father's sins. I believed her. I wanted to believe her." "And when Lydia died?" Mrs. Pemberton's voice shook with rage. "When my daughter, your own cousin's child, died screaming in agony, what did you believe then?" Dr. Pemberton buried his face in his hands. "I knew. God forgive me, I knew. But by then, Victoria had leverage over me. She knew about my gambling debts, my—" indiscretions with patience. She threatened to destroy me if I spoke. So, you let a murderer go free, Alexander said coldly. You let Isabella be condemned for a crime you knew she did not commit. You would have let Victoria poison her as well, had your conscience not finally stirred. I could not again. The doctor was weeping now. When she asked me about the dosage, when I saw that same powder, I knew I could not be silent any longer. I may be a coward, my lord, but I am not a monster. That distinction grows remarkably fine, the magistrate said sharply. He had been taking notes throughout, his expression stern. Dr. Pemberton, you will be charged as an accessory to murder. Your cooperation may reduce your sentence, but you will face justice. As guards led the broken doctor away, Isabella felt a strange mix of pity and revulsion. How many people had remained silent? How many had suspected and said nothing? How many lives could have been saved if someone, anyone, had spoken up sooner? My lady? Isabella turned to find Mrs. Pemberton standing before her, tears streaming down her weathered face. I owe you an apology, the older woman said. When I heard of your betrothal to his lordship, I believed. I wrote terrible things. I thought you were another victim in the making, or perhaps even an accomplice. I did not know. You could not have known, Isabella said gently, taking the woman's hands. I understand grief, Mrs. Pemberton. I understand the need to blame someone when the truth is too painful to bear. My Lydia was so excited to marry him, Mrs. Pemberton whispered, glancing at Alexander. She spoke of nothing else for weeks. And then she was gone. So suddenly. I needed someone to blame. But it should have been Victoria all along. That woman stole my daughter from me. She stole 3 years from me, Isabella said softly. She stole 3 lives from Alexander. She nearly stole our futures as well. But she failed, Mrs. Pemberton. In the end, she failed. The truth came out, and justice will be served. It does not bring them back. No, Isabella agreed, her voice thick with sorrow. It does not. But perhaps we can ensure their deaths were not entirely in vain. Thornfield Manor, the place where I was imprisoned, I intend to transform it into a refuge for the wrongly accused, a place where women like me can find safety while they fight for justice. Would you be willing to help? To serve on the governing board, perhaps? Your daughter's name could be honoured there. Mrs. Pemberton's eyes widened, then filled with fresh tears. You would do that after I condemned you. You did what anyone might do in grief, Isabella said, but together we can do something better. We can create something good from all this tragedy. The older woman embraced her fiercely, and Isabella felt some of the weight lift from her heart. This was healing, not just for her, but for all of them who had been touched by Victoria's poison. The magistrate cleared his throat. My lord, my lady, I have all the statements I require. Lady Victoria will be tried for murder, likely within the month, given the evidence and her public confession. I expect the verdict will be decisive. And the sentence? Alexander asked. For 4 murders and 1 attempted murder of nobility, no less? The magistrate's expression was grim. Hanging, without question. Isabella felt no satisfaction at the pronouncement, only a deep, weary sadness. So many lives destroyed by one woman's bitterness. So much pain caused by an old man's selfishness in taking a mistress and then casting her aside without thought for the consequences. My father bears some responsibility for this, Alexander said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. He used Victoria and discarded her. He created the monster she became. Your father's sins are not yours to bear, Isabella said firmly. You are not responsible for his choices, Alexander. just as I am not responsible for Edmund's treatment of me or Victoria's crimes. When did you become so wise? Alexander asked, a hint of humour returning to his voice. When I spent 3 years alone with my thoughts, Isabella replied. One learns much in isolation, both about oneself and about the nature of guilt and responsibility. Lord Blackwood stepped forward. Lord Ravencroft, Lady Isabella, my wife and I wish to apologise for our earlier coldness. We should have questioned the rumours, should have demanded proof before shunning you both. We were cowards, and we are ashamed. You were afraid, Isabella said. Fear makes cowards of us all, but you opened your home tonight, even knowing what society would say. That took courage. We will make amends, Lady Blackwood said, her nervous flutter now replaced with determination. We will ensure society knows the truth. We will sponsor you both, make certain you are received everywhere. It is the least we can do. That is generous, Alexander said, but unnecessary. Isabella and I care little for society's approval at this point. Perhaps not, Lord Blackwood said, but you will need society's support if you wish to establish this refuge at Thornfield Manor. Such an endeavour will require funding, political backing, social acceptance. Let us help you. Let us turn our shame into something useful. Isabella looked at Alexander, who nodded slowly. Very well. We accept your support gratefully. As the meeting concluded and people began to disperse, Isabella felt exhaustion finally catching up with her. It was over, truly, finally over. Victoria would face justice. Her own name was cleared. And she had found, against all odds, a man who saw her not as a convenient wife or a suspected murderess, but as a partner and equal. Come, Alexander said, offering his arm. Lord Blackwood has offered us rooms here for the day. You need rest, Isabella. Real rest, without fear or worry. Will you stay with me? She asked, then blushed at the forwardness of the request. I mean, I do not wish to be alone. Not yet. I will stay, Alexander promised, for as long as you need me. Forever, then, Isabella said softly. Alexander smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. Forever sounds acceptable to me. They climbed the stairs to the guest chambers, and for the first time in 3 years, Isabella fell asleep without fear. Without grey dresses, or locked doors, or accusations haunting her dreams. She slept in Alexander's arms, safe and free at last. I suspect she's just me to Washington Chapter 7. Vows and New Beginnings. 3 weeks later, on a crisp October morning, Lady Isabella Grayson became the Marchioness of Ravencroft. The wedding took place not in London, where society could gawk and gossip, but in the small stone church near Ravencroft Hall. It was an intimate affair, fewer than 50 guests, all carefully chosen from among those who had shown them true support during the investigation and trial. Isabella wore ivory silk instead of grey, her auburn hair crowned with autumn roses. She carried no bouquet. Instead, her hands were free to clasp Alexander's as they stood before the altar. Thomas Keene attended, his reputation fully restored, along with an official pardon from the Crown for his unwitting role in providing the poison. Mrs. Pemberton sat in the front pew, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief embroidered with her daughter's initials. Jameson stood proudly at the back, having been given the honour of escorting Isabella down the aisle in the absence of living family. Lord and Lady Blackwood had made good on their promise, using their considerable influence to ensure that invitations to the wedding were seen as coveted honours. Even Lady Pemberton's initial letter of denunciation had been publicly retracted and apologised for in the Times. Lady Victoria herself was conspicuously absent, residing in Newgate Prison as she awaited trial. Her hearing had been scheduled for the following month, and given the overwhelming evidence and her public confession, few doubted the outcome. The vicar, an elderly man who had known Alexander since childhood, smiled as he addressed the congregation. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness a most extraordinary union. The Marquess of Ravencroft and Lady Isabella Grayson have travelled through darkness to reach this moment. They have faced false accusations, endured society's condemnation, and emerged with truth as their shield and justice as their sword." Isabella glanced at Alexander, who stood tall and proud beside her. The harsh lines of his face had softened over the past weeks. The weight of the curse finally lifted. He met her gaze, and she saw in his storm-grey eyes everything she needed to know: devotion, respect, and yes, love. "Marriage," the vicar continued, "is not merely a union of convenience or obligation. It is a partnership of souls, a covenant between equals who choose each other freely. And never has that truth been more evident than in the couple before us today." The ceremony proceeded with traditional vows, but when the vicar invited Alexander to speak his personal promises, the Marquess surprised everyone by pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "I did not prepare a speech," Alexander said, his voice carrying clearly through the small church. "For the past 3 years, I believed myself cursed, unworthy of love or happiness. I built walls around my heart and convinced myself that isolation was safety." He turned to face Isabella fully, his hands clasping hers tightly. "And then I met a woman in grey, tending a garden in exile. A woman who had every reason to be bitter and broken, yet stood tall and proud. A woman who looked at me without fear, who saw past the rumours to the man beneath. Isabella, you gave me back my life. You reminded me that truth matters, that justice is worth fighting for, and that love, real love, is not a curse, but a blessing." His voice grew thick with emotion. "I promise to see you always, not as society defines you, not as others have tried to diminish you, but as you truly are, brilliant, courageous, and infinitely worthy of love. I promise to stand beside you as an equal partner, to listen when you speak, to value your counsel, and to never, ever take your presence in my life for granted." Isabella felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I promise," Alexander concluded, "to spend every day of our marriage choosing you as you have chosen me. In darkness and in light, in scandal and in triumph, I am yours, forever." The church was silent save for the sound of sniffling from multiple pews. Even the stoic Lord Blackwood was surreptitiously wiping his eyes. The vicar turned to Isabella. "And have you words to speak, my lady?" Isabella had not prepared anything either, but the words came easily, flowing from a heart that had finally learned to trust again. "3 years ago, I believed my life was over," she said softly. "I was condemned without trial, imprisoned without cause, forgotten by a society that should have protected me. I wore grey dresses and tended a garden and waited to fade away into nothing." She squeezed Alexander's hands, drawing strength from his steady presence. "But then a marquess appeared in my garden and commanded my presence at dinner. And though I did not know it then, that moment changed everything. Alexander, you did not save me. I had to save myself, and you understood that. But you gave me the tools and support I needed to fight back. You believed me when belief itself was a radical act." Her voice grew stronger. "I promise to be your partner in all things, not your subordinate or your decoration. I promise to challenge you when you are wrong, to support you when you are right, and to always, always tell you the truth. I promise to build with you a life based not on society's expectations, but on our own values and choices." She smiled through her tears. "I promise to never wear grey again unless I choose to never let fear silence me, to never accept less than I deserve. And I promise that every day of our marriage, I will choose you, not because I need you, but because I want you, because together we are stronger than either of us could ever be alone. Forever, she whispered, echoing his earlier promise. Forever, Alexander agreed. The vicar beamed. Then, by the power vested in me by God and the Church of England, I pronounce you husband and wife. Lord Ravencroft, you may kiss your bride. Alexander cupped Isabella's face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle, and kissed her with all the passion and promise their future held. The church erupted in applause and cheers. Propriety be damned. As they walked back down the aisle together, man and wife, Isabella felt as though she were floating. The autumn sun streamed through the stained glass windows, painting them both in colours of ruby and sapphire and gold. No more grey. Never again. The wedding breakfast was held at Ravencroft Hall, and Isabella got her first real look at what would now be her home. The estate was indeed draughty, as Alexander had warned, but it was also magnificent. All soaring ceilings and ancient stone, with gardens that put even Thornfield Manor to shame. It needs work, Alexander admitted as he showed her through the halls. My father let it fall into disrepair in his later years, too consumed with his various entanglements to properly manage the estate. Then we shall restore it together, Isabella said practically, a project to occupy us between managing Thornfield's refuge and scandalising society with our happiness. Alexander laughed, pulling her close. You intend to scandalise society? Absolutely. I think we should host salons for female writers and artists. We should fund scholarships for women to study medicine and law. We should be thoroughly modern and completely inappropriate. Isabella's eyes sparkled with mischief. After all, we have already been condemned as murderers. How much worse can our reputation get? I married a radical, Alexander said with mock horror. You married your equal, Isabella corrected, and you knew exactly what you were getting. They rejoined their guests for the celebratory meal, where toast after toast was raised to their happiness, their courage, their justice. Thomas Keene stood and spoke movingly about redemption and second chances. Mrs. Pemberton welcomed Isabella into a sort of informal family of survivors, united by grief but strengthened by truth. But it was Jameson's toast that brought tears to Isabella's eyes. I have served the Grayson family for 40 years, the elderly butler said, his voice wavering slightly. I watched Lady Isabella arrive as a young bride, full of hope and dreams. I watched those dreams slowly crushed under the weight of an unhappy marriage and a vindictive mother-in-law. I watched her retreat into grey dresses and isolation, and I feared I would watch her fade away entirely. He raised his glass, his eyes shining. But today, I watch her crowned with roses and dressed in ivory, standing beside a man who sees her true worth. Today, I watch her smile without fear, laugh without restraint, and embrace a future filled with possibility. Lady Isabella, forgive me, Lady Ravencroft, you have taught me that even in our darkest moments, hope survives. You have shown that truth, though buried, will always rise again. And you have proved that we are not defined by others' condemnation, but by our own courage. To Lady Ravencroft, he concluded, his voice ringing out, may your life be as colourful as your spirit, and may you never wear grey again unless you damn well please. The room erupted in laughter and cheers, and Isabella found herself embraced by person after person, each offering congratulations and support. As the afternoon wore on and guests began to depart, Alexander drew Isabella aside to a private terrace overlooking the gardens. There is something I must show you, he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice that she had never heard before. He led her through the gardens to a small folly at the far end, a circular structure of white stone columns covered in climbing roses. "My mother's garden house," Alexander explained. "She died when I was 10, and my father could not bear to maintain it. It has stood empty for 20 years. Isabella stepped inside and gasped. The interior had been completely restored, filled with comfortable furniture, bookshelves, and a beautiful writing desk positioned to catch the afternoon light. "I had it restored for you," Alexander said quietly. "I hoped you might like a space of your own, somewhere you could write or read or simply be alone when you need solitude. Marriage should not mean losing yourself, Isabella. It should mean having a partner who supports your independence as much as your togetherness." Isabella turned to him, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "You restored your mother's sanctuary for me?" "She would have loved you," Alexander said simply. "She was strong-willed and independent herself. My father often complained that she was too modern in her thinking. She would have admired your courage and your refusal to be diminished." Isabella walked slowly around the space, running her fingers over the smooth wood of the desk, the spines of books already shelved, volumes on law and medicine and social reform, chosen specifically for her interests. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Alexander, this is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me." "You deserve thoughtfulness," Alexander said, moving to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "You deserve space and respect and consideration. You deserve to be cherished, Isabella." She turned in his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him deeply. "As do you. You have spent so long carrying guilt that was never yours to bear. Let it go, Alexander. We are free now, both of us." "Free," he repeated, as if testing the word. "I am not certain I remember what that feels like." "Then we shall learn together," Isabella said. "We shall make our own rules, build our own life, and refuse to let anyone else define us ever again." As the sun set over Ravencroft Hall, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the newly married couple stood together in the garden house, wrapped in each other's arms. Finally, completely free. The curse was broken. The truth had prevailed. And two wounded souls had found, in each other, not salvation, but partnership. Abjuchashas to Chapter 8, Full Circle. 1 year later, Isabella stood in the renovated Great Hall of Thornfield Manor, watching the autumn light stream through windows that had been thoroughly cleaned and repaired. The house that had once been her prison was now something entirely different, a beacon of hope for women who found themselves condemned without cause. The Thornfield Refuge for the Wrongly Accused had opened its doors 6 months ago, funded by Isabella's restored inheritance, Alexander's considerable wealth, and donations from a growing list of supporters, including the Blackwoods, Mrs. Pemberton, and even several members of Parliament who had taken an interest in judicial reform. Currently, the refuge housed 8 women, each with her own story of false accusation and imprisonment. There was Anne, a merchant's daughter accused of theft by an employer who simply wanted to avoid paying her wages. There was Sarah, a widow whose in-laws claimed she had poisoned her husband, a case so similar to Isabella's own that she had taken a special interest. There was Mary, accused of witchcraft by a rival in her village, and Elizabeth, whose husband had fabricated adultery charges to free himself for another woman. Each woman had a private room, access to legal counsel paid for by the refuge, and most importantly, a community of support from others who understood what it meant to be condemned without proof. "My lady," Anne approached, her young face nervous. "The solicitor has just arrived from London. He says he has news about my case." "Then let us hear it together," Isabella said warmly, taking the girl's arm. The news was good. The employer had been found to have accused 3 other girls of similar thefts, and a magistrate had finally taken notice. Anne's case would be dismissed, and she would receive compensation for her lost wages and damaged reputation. The girl wept with relief, and Isabella held her, remembering what it felt like to finally be believed, to finally be free. "What will you do now?" Isabella asked when Anne had composed herself. "Return home if my parents will have me," Anne said. "And perhaps I will speak about what happened. Help other girls know they are not alone." "You would be a powerful advocate," Isabella said, "and if you need support, financial or otherwise, you need only ask. The refuge's mission does not end when you leave these walls." After Anne had gone to share the news with the other residents, Isabella walked through the house that held so many memories. The dower house, where she had lived in isolation, had been converted into offices for the refuge's small staff. The main house, where Lady Victoria had held court over her prison kingdom, now hosted communal dining rooms, libraries, and meeting spaces. The rose garden, where she had first met Alexander, had been expanded and made beautiful again, a place of meditation and healing for the residents. "You have done something remarkable here," a voice said from behind her. Isabella turned to find Mrs. Pemberton, who now served as the refuge's chairman of the board, approaching with a satisfied smile. "We have done something remarkable," Isabella corrected. "This was never meant to be my project alone." "True enough, but it was your vision that brought us together." Mrs. Pemberton looked around the transformed space. "My Lydia would have loved this. She was always championing the underdog, defending those who could not defend themselves. Then we honour her memory every day," Isabella said softly. "Speaking of which," Mrs. Pemberton's expression turned sly, "when are you going to tell your husband about the baby?" Isabella's hand instinctively went to her still flat stomach. "How did you—" "I am a mother, my dear, and I have eyes. You have been exhausted for weeks, turning green at certain smells, and touching your middle with that unconscious protectiveness that expectant mothers always have." Mrs. Pemberton smiled. "Does Alexander know?" "Not yet. I only confirmed it with the physician this morning." Isabella felt a flutter of joy and fear. "I have been waiting for the right moment." "There is no right moment for such news. Only the moment you choose." Mrs. Pemberton squeezed her hand. "But know this. You will be a wonderful mother, Isabella. You have so much love to give, and you understand better than most how precious and fragile life is." After Mrs. Pemberton departed, Isabella remained in the garden, her hand still resting on her stomach. A baby. A child who would grow up free from curses and accusations, who would know both parents loved them without reservation, who would be taught that truth mattered, and justice was worth fighting for. She heard the sound of hoofbeats, and looked up to see Alexander riding up the drive, returning from London, where he had been consulting with the Home Secretary about prison reforms and better protections for the accused. He dismounted with his usual grace and strode toward her, his face lighting up with that smile he reserved only for her. "My dear wife," he said, pulling her into his arms, "I have missed you these 3 days." "And I you." Isabella breathed in his familiar scent, sandalwood and leather and home. "How was London?" "Tedious, but productive. The Home Secretary is interested in using the refuge as a model for similar institutions throughout England. You may find yourself quite famous, Lady Ravencroft." "God forbid," Isabella said with mock horror. "Once was enough." Alexander laughed, then studied her face more carefully. "You have news. I can see it in your eyes. There would never be a more perfect moment than this. Standing in the garden where they had first met, surrounded by evidence of all they had built together, wrapped in the arms of the man who had seen her when she was invisible. I have news, Isabella confirmed. Alexander, we are going to have a child. He went very still, his eyes widening. A child? Yes. The physician confirmed it this morning. I am approximately 2 months along, which means the baby should arrive in the spring. For a long moment, Alexander simply stared at her. Then, slowly, his expression transformed, from shock to wonder to pure, radiant joy. A child, he repeated, his voice rough with emotion. Isabella, we are going to have a child. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around as she laughed, and then very carefully set her down again. I should not have done that. Are you well? Should you be working so hard at the refuge? Do you need to rest? I am perfectly well, and I will continue my work at the refuge as long as I am able, Isabella said firmly. I am with child, Alexander, not made of glass. I know, but Isabella? He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes suspiciously bright. For 3 years I believed I was cursed, that death followed me, that I would never have a family or a future. And now I have you, and the refuge and a child on the way. Sometimes I fear I will wake up and find this was all a dream. It is not a dream, Isabella assured him. It is real. It is our life, the life we fought for, that we built together from the ashes of tragedy. A life without curses, Alexander said softly. A life without grey dresses, Isabella added. A life where we choose each other every day. Every day, Isabella agreed. They stood there in the autumn garden, holding each other as the sun began to set in shades of gold and crimson and violet. That evening, back at Ravencroft Hall, they hosted a small dinner party. The Blackwoods, Mrs. Pemberton, Thomas Keene, and Jameson, who had officially retired from service, but refused to miss important family celebrations. When Alexander announced that they were expecting a child, the room erupted in celebration. Toasts were raised, plans were made, and Jameson declared that he would personally oversee the restoration of the nursery that had been closed since Alexander's own childhood. Have you thought of names? Lady Blackwood asked, her earlier nervousness completely gone after a year of true friendship with Isabella. Edmund, if it is a boy, Isabella said quietly, not for my late husband, but because it means fortunate protector, and this child will be both, fortunate to be born into love and protected by 2 parents who understand the value of truth and justice. And if it is a girl? Mrs. Pemberton asked. Catherine, Alexander said, glancing at Isabella for confirmation. For my first fiancée, she deserves to be remembered. As do they all, Isabella added. Catherine, Margaret, Lydia, and Edmund, 4 people whose lives were stolen by one woman's bitterness. Our child, whatever name we give them, will grow up knowing their stories, understanding that justice delayed is not justice denied. Heavy lessons for a child, Lord Blackwood observed. Important lessons, Isabella corrected. Our child will also learn about love that overcomes adversity, about courage in the face of condemnation, and about the importance of seeing people truly, rather than accepting society's judgments. They will be insufferably idealistic, Alexander said with a smile. They will be exactly what the world needs, Isabella replied. As the evening wore on and their friends departed, Alexander and Isabella walked through the halls of Ravencroft Hall, planning the nursery, discussing the future, dreaming of all that lay ahead. Do you ever regret it? Alexander asked as they stood in what would become the nursery. Trading a quiet life in the country for all of this? The refuge, the advocacy, the public scrutiny? Isabella considered. A year ago, she'd been a woman in grey, invisible and condemned. Now she wore jewel tones and spoke at parliamentary committees. She ran a refuge that had already helped dozens of women. She was married to a man who saw her as an equal partner. and she carried within her a new life, a symbol of hope and future. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "This is the life I was meant to live, Alexander. Not the one society tried to force on me, but the one I chose for myself." "The one we chose together," he corrected. "Together," she agreed. They stood at the window, watching the stars emerge over the northern moors, and Isabella thought of that first night in the rose garden, when a cursed Marquess had commanded her presence and changed everything. She had been wearing grey then, had believed her life was over, had accepted that she would fade away into nothing. But that woman was gone. In her place stood Lady Isabella Ravencroft, wife, mother-to-be, advocate for justice, and architect of her own destiny. The curse was broken. The grey dresses were burned, and two people who had been condemned by society had built, from the ashes of tragedy, a life filled with purpose, passion, and love. 6 months later, on a spring morning, when the gardens of Ravencroft Hall burst with daffodils and new roses, Isabella gave birth to a healthy son. They named him Edmund Alexander Thorne, and when Alexander held him for the first time, tears streamed unashamedly down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered, his large hands cradling the tiny bundle with infinite care. "Isabella, he is absolutely perfect." "He is ours," Isabella said, exhausted but radiant. "No curse, no shadow, just ours." The christening took place on a brilliant Sunday afternoon, with half the county in attendance, not out of obligation, but genuine affection. The Thornfield Refuge had become nationally known, inspiring similar institutions in Manchester, Bristol, and Edinburgh. Isabella had testified before Parliament twice, her articulate passion for judicial reform earning respect even from those who had once condemned her. Alexander had thrown himself into advocacy as well, using his military connections and aristocratic standing to push for better treatment of the accused, for legal representation for the poor, and for reforms that would prevent another Lady Victoria from destroying innocent lives with impunity. Lady Victoria herself had been executed 8 months prior, unrepentant to the end. Her last words, witnesses reported, were a curse upon Alexander's family, empty words from a bitter soul, signifying nothing. The old superstitions had no power here. As the vicar blessed baby Edmund, surrounded by friends and family, Isabella caught Alexander's eye across the baptismal font. In that glance they shared everything: the memory of darkness overcome, the joy of victory hard won, and the promise of a future built on truth. Mrs. Pemberton stood as godmother, her hand resting protectively on the baby's head. Thomas Keene, fully restored to respectability, and now running a model apothecary that trained others in proper record-keeping and ethical practices, served as godfather. Jameson wept openly throughout the ceremony, not bothering to hide his joy. After the christening, back at Ravencroft Hall, the celebration continued into the evening. The ballroom that had stood empty for years now blazed with light and laughter. Unlike that fateful Blackwood ball where truth had emerged through confrontation, this was a celebration of pure joy. Isabella wore a gown of sapphire blue, her auburn hair crowned with flowers instead of grey. She danced with Alexander, their son sleeping peacefully in Mrs. Pemberton's arms nearby, and felt happiness so complete it almost frightened her. "What are you thinking?" Alexander asked, sensing her momentary tension. "That I am almost afraid to be this happy," Isabella admitted. "That some part of me still expects it to be taken away." "It will not be," Alexander said firmly. "We fought too hard for this, Isabella. We earned this happiness with blood and tears and 3 years of suffering. It is ours by right, and no one, no curse, no scandal, no bitterness can take it from us now." "Promise me," Isabella said, her hands tightening on his shoulders. "Promise me we will always remember what it cost, that we will never become complacent, never stop fighting for those who are still condemned and voiceless." "I promise," Alexander said solemnly. "Our son will grow up understanding that privilege comes with responsibility, that those who have power must use it to protect the powerless, that truth matters more than convenience, and justice more than reputation." "He will be insufferable," Isabella said, echoing Alexander's words from months ago, but with love in her voice. "He will be extraordinary," Alexander corrected, "just like his mother." They danced until midnight, until the guests began to depart with warm farewells and promises to visit soon, until baby Edmund woke hungry and demanded his mother's attention, until the servants had cleared away the remnants of celebration and Ravencroft Hall settled into peaceful quiet. In the nursery, Isabella fed her son while Alexander watched from a chair by the window, his expression soft with wonder. "I never thought I would have this," he said quietly. "A wife I loved, a child, a purpose beyond mere survival." "Nor did I," Isabella said. "For 3 years I believed my life was over at 27, that I would spend the rest of my days in grey, forgotten and condemned. And now you're a mother, an advocate, a force for change," Alexander finished. "Now you wear colours that rival the sunset, and half of Parliament trembles when you visit, because they know you will hold them accountable." "Only half?" Isabella teased. "I must be losing my touch." Alexander laughed, moving to sit beside her on the floor, his shoulder touching hers as they both gazed at their son. "Do you think he will understand?" Isabella asked softly. "When he is old enough, will he understand why we tell him about the curse, about the accusations, about everything we survived?" "I think," Alexander said slowly, "that he will understand that his parents refused to accept injustice, that they fought for truth even when truth was dangerous, that they built something good from terrible tragedy. And I think that understanding will shape him into someone we can be proud of. Someone who sees people truly," Isabella added, "rather than accepting society's judgments. Someone who knows that grey dresses are just clothing, not condemnation. Someone who understands that curses are just stories, and the real monsters are those who use fear and superstition to destroy lives." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son's tiny chest rise and fall with each breath. Outside, an owl hooted in the darkness, and the spring wind rustled new leaves in the ancient oaks. "Thank you," Alexander said suddenly. "For what?" "For not running when I commanded you to dinner that day in the garden, for standing your ground when you had every reason to flee, for believing that we could uncover the truth when everyone else had accepted the lies, for choosing me over and over, even when I gave you reasons to doubt." "Thank you," Isabella replied, "for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing me when I was condemned, for understanding that freedom means choice, not control, for building with me instead of for me, for being my partner, not my saviour." "Always partners," Alexander agreed. "Oh, always." As baby Edmund drifted back to sleep, they carried him to his cradle, a beautiful piece of carved oak that had once held Alexander as an infant, and Alexander's father before him, now restored and polished to a warm gleam. "Our son will sleep in this cradle without curse or shadow," Isabella whispered, tucking the blanket around him. "He will grow up knowing he is loved, valued, and free to become whomever he chooses." "And he will know the stories," Alexander added. "Catherine and Margaret and Lydia, Edmund Grayson, Thomas Keene and his shop, Lady Victoria's bitterness and the terrible price it exacted. He will know all of it, so he never forgets that justice matters." They stood over the cradle together, hand in hand, and Isabella felt the last remnants of grey, finally, completely fade away. She was no longer the condemned widow in the dower house. She was Isabella Ravencroft, mother, wife, advocate, survivor. She was, at last, exactly who she was meant to be. Epilogue, 5 years later. The grand ballroom of Ravencroft Hall blazed with autumn light, every window thrown open to let in the crisp October air. The annual benefit ball for the Thornfield Refuge had become the social event of the season, no longer because of scandal, but because of the cause's importance and the host's influence. Isabella, now 32 and at the height of her influence, moved through the crowd with practiced grace. She wore a gown of deep burgundy, her auburn hair artfully arranged, her throat adorned with the emeralds Alexander had given her years ago. At her side, young Edmund, now 5 years old and precociously intelligent, held tightly to her hand, his grey eyes, so like his father's, taking in everything with solemn interest. "Mamma," he said in his clear, serious voice, "why is everyone dressed so fancy?" "Because we are celebrating something important, darling," Isabella explained, kneeling to his level. "Remember what we discussed? The refuge helps people who have been treated unfairly." "Like you were," Edmund said matter-of-factly, "before you met Papa." "Yes, exactly like that. And tonight, we are raising money to help even more people." "Then it is a very good party," Edmund decided with 5-year-old logic. Alexander appeared through the crowd, now 37, and distinguished with just a touch of silver at his temples. The scar on his cheek had faded, but remained visible, a mark he wore without shame, a reminder of battles fought and survived. "The Prime Minister has arrived," he murmured to Isabella, "along with 3 cabinet ministers and the Lord Chancellor. Your speech will have quite an audience, my dear." "Excellent," Isabella said with a smile that was equal parts gracious and steely. "I have some choice words about the proposed changes to habeas corpus that I have been saving." "You terrify them, you know," Alexander said, with evident pride. "Good. They should be terrified of what they might face if they forget that justice applies to everyone, not just the privileged." Little Edmund tugged at his father's coat. "Papa, Mrs. Pemberton says I may see the horses after dinner. May I?" "If you promise to stay with the groom and not wander off," Alexander said, ruffling his son's dark hair. "I promise." Edmund ran off toward Mrs. Pemberton, who had become a surrogate grandmother to him. "He is so much like you," Isabella observed. "That same serious determination." "He is like us both," Alexander corrected. "Your courage, my stubbornness, and a healthy dose of righteous indignation inherited from both parents." "The world will not know what to do with him," Isabella said fondly. "The world rarely knows what to do with people who refuse to accept injustice," Alexander replied, "which is precisely why we need more of them." The evening proceeded with military precision. Dinner, followed by testimonials from women whose lives had been changed by the refuge, followed by Isabella's speech about judicial reform. She spoke passionately but precisely about the need for better legal protections, for presumption of innocence, for the dangers of accepting accusations without evidence. The audience, composed of the most powerful people in England, listened with rapt attention. Isabella Ravencroft had become a force to be reckoned with, her past suffering lending weight to her words, her intelligence and eloquence impossible to dismiss. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Donations poured in, enough to fund 3 more refugees and establish a legal aid society for the accused poor. As the ball continued into the evening, Isabella found herself on the terrace, taking a moment of quiet in the midst of chaos. The stars blazed overhead, clear and bright in the autumn sky. "Hiding? Lady Ravencroft? A familiar voice teased. She turned to find Sarah, one of the first residents of the Thornfield Refuge, now trained as a solicitor and working with the Legal Aid Society. The young woman had not only cleared her own name, but had dedicated herself to helping others do the same. Not hiding, Isabella said, merely catching my breath. 5 years ago, I could not have imagined this. Hundreds of people gathered to support a cause I created. Sometimes it feels surreal. 5 years ago, you were still fighting for your own freedom, Sarah said. Now you fight for everyone's. That is not surreal, Lady Ravencroft. That is called making a difference. We make a difference, Isabella corrected. You, Mrs. Pemberton, Mr. Keene, Alexander, all the people who work at the refuges and the Legal Aid Society. This was never meant to be my crusade alone. Perhaps not, Sarah agreed. But you started it. You took your own tragedy and transformed it into hope for countless others. That takes remarkable courage. After Sarah returned to the ballroom, Alexander joined Isabella on the terrace, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. To us, he said, offering her a glass. To us, Isabella agreed, touching her glass to his. To 5 years of marriage, 1 remarkable son, and a life we built from ashes. To no more grey dresses, Alexander added, to broken curses and proven truth, to partnership and love, to choosing each other every day for the rest of our lives. They drank, and then Alexander set both glasses aside and pulled Isabella into his arms. They danced there on the terrace, to music drifting from the ballroom, under the stars that had witnessed their darkest moments and their brightest triumphs. I love you, Alexander said softly. I do not say it often enough, but I love you with everything I am. I know, Isabella replied, her head resting on his shoulder. And I love you, not because you saved me. Because I did not save you, Alexander finished, having heard this particular exchange many times over the years. Because I saw you save yourself and chose to stand beside you. Exactly. They danced until the music stopped, until their guests began to depart, with promises of continued support, until little Edmund appeared with grass stains on his breeches and stories of horses and grooms and adventures. They put their son to bed together, taking turns reading from his favourite storybook, not fairy tales of princes saving princesses, but tales of heroes who saved themselves, of justice prevailing through courage and persistence. And later, alone in their chambers, Isabella and Alexander stood at the window looking out over the moonlit gardens. Do you ever think about that day? Isabella asked. The day you appeared in my rose garden and commanded me to dinner. I think about it every day, Alexander admitted. I think about how close I came to never meeting you, to living the rest of my life under that curse, to dying bitter and alone. And I think about how close I came to fading away entirely, Isabella said, to accepting that grey prison as my fate. But we did not fade, Alexander said firmly. We fought. We survived. We built this life together, against all odds and all expectations. We did, Isabella agreed. She turned from the window to face him fully. And we will continue to fight, to build, to make the world better for Edmund and for all the children who come after him. Until we are too old to fight anymore, Alexander said with a smile. And then we will teach others to carry on, Isabella replied. The work is never finished, Alexander. There will always be injustice, always be people who are condemned without cause. But there will also always be people like us, people who refuse to accept it, who fight back, who turn tragedy into transformation. People like us? Alexander repeated. He pulled her close, kissing her with the passion of 5 years of marriage that had only grown deeper with time. People who know that the real curse is silence and the real freedom is truth. Truth and love, Isabella whispered against his lips. Truth and love, Alexander agreed. And as the moon rose over Ravencroft Hall, touching everything with silver light, they knew that the shadows of the past had no power here. The curse was broken. The grey dresses were gone. And two people who had been condemned by society had created, through courage and love and stubborn determination, a legacy that would outlast scandal, outlast tragedy, outlast even themselves. They had chosen each other in a rose garden 5 years ago. They chose each other still, every single day, and they would continue choosing each other for all the days of their lives. This was their story, not of salvation or rescue, but of two equals who found in each other the strength to fight for justice, the courage to demand truth, and the love that made everything worthwhile. A woman in grey who learned to wear colour again. A cursed Marquess who discovered that the real curse was believing in curses. And a love that proved stronger than poison, more enduring than scandal, and more powerful than any force that tried to destroy it. Their story ended not with a rescue, but with a choice. And they chose love, truth, and justice every single day for the rest of their extraordinary lives. Surfai Baisirashunai, if Lady Isabella's journey from grey dresses to a crown of roses touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more stories where the condemned become champions and broken souls become whole. Write in the comments your favourite moment. The first meeting in the garden, the dramatic unmasking at the ball, or the birth of their son. And don't forget to check the playlist for more captivating romances of redemption and justice. Remember, you are not defined by the accusations others level against you, nor by the prisons they try to build around you. Your story is not finished. Like Isabella and Alexander, you have the power to choose truth, to fight for justice, and to build a life of meaning from even the darkest circumstances. Until next time, dear readers, may you always have the courage to wear your true colours, and may you find someone who sees you truly, not as society defines you, but as you really are. This is Amelia, reminding you that every ending is also a beginning, and that love, real love, is always a choice we make, every single day.